Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed for part 2 of the Q&A series here at Computex. We've moved to a new location. Pretty exciting here, Tim. There's a nice view behind us. Hopefully that's coming through on the camera. But of course, we are here to answer your questions, so we're going to get into that. But before we do, our 2026 Computex coverage is brought to you by MSI and their GeForce RTX 50 series graphics cards, including flagship models like the Supreme Liquid and Vanguard, both of which delivered class-leading results in our testing. Powered by Nvidia's Blackwell architecture, RTX 50 series GPUs are the ultimate way to experience ray tracing, delivering more realistic lighting and visual fidelity than ever before. You'll also benefit from AI-powered DLSS 4.5 frame generation and Nvidia Reflex for smoother, more responsive gameplay. So for more information on MSI's GeForce RTX 50 series of graphics cards, please check the links in the video description. Finally, a big thank you to G.Skill for helping to make our Computex trip possible this year. G.Skill offers an outstanding range of DDR5 memory with AMD Expo and AMD Expo featuring ultra-low latency support specifically designed to maximize AMD Ryzen performance. So for more information, please check the links in the video description. Alright, what naming would you suggest to replace the GRE branding? So Ali, for example. I did think about this a bit because I did say AMD used the least coolest arrangement of letters they could for the 9070 GRE or any of their GRE models. So I guess it's sort of on me then to define what a cool arrangement of letters would be, like XT. XTX, XT's fine. But I think the bigger problem here is that any arrangement of letters you come up with to signify that this is a less good product is probably not going to be great. So like Ali works fine. They've used that way back in the past, I believe. You're kind of saying it's a light version, so however you want to sort of go about saying that. But ultimately you don't want to do that. You want the 9070 with nothing following it to be the base model, the worst version. You don't want to have like some letters that mean this version's better and then some letters that mean this version's worse. That's not very consumer friendly. And you just don't want the letters to be like, oh yeah, that's the version you want to avoid or whatever. So that's sort of what I was alluding to in my review. AMD kind of painted themselves in a bit of a corner there when it came to the binning process, that any binned Navi 48 silicon would still have to be a 9070 of some variant, but we already had the base 9070. So if they had have launched the 9070 XT and then like the XTX, I guess, then the base 9070 could have been this 12 gigabyte cut down version, which I still don't think is great. Like it's still not really a 9070 in my opinion. When they cut it down so heavily, it really becomes something else, something less than a 9070. Anyway, that's my opinion on it. What do you think?
I think it's just a classic case of why don't they just use more numbers? I mean, the current lineup has 9070s and 9060s.
Yeah.
What happened to all the other numbers? I mean, I think the difficulty is with AMD's products is that often even just the XT part gets lost. Like when you do searches on retails and things like that, you know, the 9070s and XT models come up at the same time. It's not a great experience for gamers. I think it's just AMD going ahead and being like, let's just copy Nvidia's name and change, you know, a couple of things here. You know, TI becomes XT, the 5 becomes a 9, and they call it a day. But really, there was no reason why like a 9070 XT couldn't have been like a 9080 XT or something like that. I know people would, I guess, think, oh, is this equivalent to like a 5080 from Nvidia? But if they truly were planning like a 9070 GRE from a fair way out, it would have made more sense to use more of the number range and not rely as much on the lettering. But I guess the current positioning, right? They couldn't really call it like a 96. It used to be, right? I was almost going to say a 9650 or whatever, because they used to have the 6650 XT, but now it's 9060.
Yeah.
What do you even do there? 9065?
Yeah.
But that's too close to a 9060, which it isn't. So it's not ideal.
Yeah, spacing them out more would have made sense. Just being confident in their own lineup and not having to try and mirror what Nvidia's doing, I think would have avoided all of that. So yeah, I think just having letters, whether it's 2 or 3, that signify that this is a worse product is probably...
Yeah, it's not good. I don't like it either.
No, I don't like that. No. All right, with the 5800X 3D coming back out, what is the very tip of the performance iceberg when it comes to GPUs to pair it with? Yeah, look, you can put a 5090 comfortably with a 5800X 3D. Those sort of GPU CPU pairings, it's really complicated. It's kind of like what we talk about, this low resolution CPU testing, all that sort of stuff. It all ties back into that. Really does depend on the games you play and how you play them as to whether or not you'll be GPU limited or CPU limited. So if you're playing a particularly GPU limited game, even if it's using like say path tracing where more of the CPU is used, you're still going to be primarily GPU limited pretty much at all times. So if you paired a 5800X 3D with a 5090 and you're doing path tracing in Cyberpunk or any of the other games, I don't think you would find yourself CPU limited because again, stuff like frame generation, if you're enabling that, that doesn't place more load on the CPU. So yeah, it really comes down to if you're playing games like, Fortnite with the performance mode, Counter-Strike, Valorant, all those games we've talked about before, the more competitive shooters, then you're going to want to prioritize your CPU and you're not going to be interested in a 5090. Like a 5070 will be perfectly fine.
I mean, there's some games, of course, where you might be prioritizing graphics features, but you're playing at 1440p or something like that, or you're not super interested in ultra, so you drop it down to high, in which case, there are some edge cases, but it's not common to sort of say like...
So basically a 5800X 3D is roughly equivalent to a Ryzen 5 7600, or if you want to be favorable, a Ryzen 7 7700. They're very usable, very powerful CPUs. You're not going to have any problems with those. You're not going to really run into strong CPU bottlenecks. A game that comes to mind might be like a Space Marine 2 type game. So you are quite heavily, you can be leveraging the CPU quite heavily in those situations as well as the GPU. And yeah, that's where it becomes a problem if you're using like a 5090. And even then, it's not that bad, the performance you're going to be seeing. Will you be fully utilizing the 5090 in that situation? Probably no. But is that going to be common? Also no. So it's, it becomes less of an issue. Again, really, you can really only simplify this into if you're primarily going to be playing very CPU demanding games that often end up more CPU limited than GPU limited, like a Space Marine 2, then you want to be a bit more careful with the pairing. Or if you're playing esports titles, again, the CPU is the thing you want to focus on more so than the GPU. But for general gaming, if you kind of dabble, you play a bit of this, a bit of that, then with the 5800X 3D, you can really go with any GPU. I wouldn't say there's a hard limit, like don't go above this point. Obviously the hard limit's the pricing anyway, like getting a 5080 is just disgustingly expensive. So the realistic GPU should be getting maybe a 5080, maybe a 5070 Ti. Sort of 9070 XTs are the more reasonably priced high-end GPUs. I think they're about $700 US at this point in time. And you're not going to have any problems with a 9070 XT and a 5800X 3D. So do you expect manufacturers to change their policies around warranties on their products or their new products in countries where they can, with the surge in pricing across the industry, considering the cost increases on their end too? So, we saw this recently when we covered Umart with the, not wanting to honor the warranty, just refund the original purchase price. And, we did a video covering that. And in the end, Corsair came to the party and replaced the kit there. I don't think they're going to adjust warranty policies. I think if there's a country that doesn't have strong consumer rights and they can just screw the customer over, they'll probably just elect to do that anyway, regardless of current market conditions, because ultimately companies don't want to look after you if they don't have to. More generally speaking, there are certainly companies that'll put their hand up saying, no, we're a customer first type company, and that's perfectly fine. I guess, actions speak louder than words on that. So, if there's evidence to prove that they do honor that, and that's fantastic. But more often than not, companies just want to sell you the product and then not deal with you again because you're just annoying and a pain in the butt for them, and it costs them money and time, and they don't like that. So if they can get away with not supporting you, I think they would do that. In Australia, they can't really adjust their policies. You can't make up a warranty. You can't say, as of now, we're going to only offer a 6-month warranty because we actually have minimum laws that are enforced within Australia for consumers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a bad situation when a company that was previously offering a part at a certain price, it suddenly goes up by 4x or 5x. I think that's pretty unprecedented among like consumer products. We don't really see that type of thing happening, at least in the short period of time. Because over time, if prices go up slowly, it doesn't matter too much with the RMA process because it's just an incremental thing. They can replace it with a slightly more expensive part over time, and that's fine. But yeah, I think it's just they're in for a bit of pain at the moment. There's really no way around it in a lot of situations where we're talking about countries where they're kind of forced into certain warranty conditions. So yeah, I do feel for the companies that are sort of suffering and having this situation where, and I think you mentioned this a bit in your video, right, where they're having to do RMAs because the failure rate stays pretty consistent over time. There's a certain user base using a product, it fails at a rate of 1 or 2% or whatever. But then what you come to is no one's buying the products. So normally they're still getting this revenue stream in where they can, replace people's failed products, but it's not too bad because revenue's ticking over.
You win some, you lose some type of attitude.
You win some, you lose some. Prices go up, but it's not too bad. People are still buying the products. What they're currently facing is this situation where they have to still do the RMAs because the products keep failing, but there's no money coming in to necessarily fund that, especially in places like Australia where warranties are largely done by the retailer as opposed to the manufacturer. And that does differ in some countries. The US, for example, we heard from a lot of you that you just send it directly back to Corsair or whoever and they deal with it. But in Australia, where it's done by the retailers, it's a big problem for them because sales drop off, but they're still having to sort of fund these warranty processes and things like that. So it's not a great situation, but yeah, the warranty sort of thing, once you start dialing that back and you start screwing over customers, customers remember, there's word of mouth, it's talked about, it goes to Reddit, we make videos about it if it's a really bad situation. So I think they just have to kind of deal with it and hope for the best. Will next-gen GPUs still come to CES 2027, or will they most likely get delayed until 2028 Q1, maybe even further, with the current DRAM crisis? So yeah, it's been an interesting Computex show speaking to the parts manufacturers about upcoming products because it doesn't sound like too much is imminent, I would say. There's certainly been past shows where we've come and there's some sort of product that's coming in the next couple of months. It seems like the next product that we're likely going to be seeing are the new CPU generations from AMD and Intel, which I would say is probably going to be a CES 2027 sort of product. It doesn't sound too confident like they'll be this year, so that's the next product I would say is in the pipeline. As for GPUs, I think they're probably even further out. Would you say you haven't really heard anything about?
I've heard nothing about next-gen GPUs.
So I think in terms of timing, we're probably looking at, later next year. I mean, CES 2027, right, would be 2 years on the dot from the announcement of the previous generation, and I don't think that's long enough.
The only stuff we've heard is like MSI showed off their next generation coolers, which the one on show was for their high end like 6090 or 6080, let's say. ASRock had a next generation cooler, so that would be for a Radeon GPU. So they were showing sort of next gen cooling tech, but they weren't saying when they expected any of that to. Usually if it's not too far away, they start sort of giving the eyebrow, yes, September, yeah. There was none of that. They were just like,
they've worked on it so it's ready for whenever they get the specifications and stuff. I think with is it going to be delayed because of the DRAM crisis or that sort of thing? I'm just not convinced that's going to have too much of an impact. I think if anything, they're going to continue the current plan, whatever it is, and just make it more expensive. I think there's too many competitive angles that come into play when you start delaying products. You're sort of going, is there going to be a slightly better time to launch this? What if your competitor then comes in and starts, having the fastest GPU or whatever? Because, not that I'm suggesting AMD's, necessarily a chance of doing that, but imagine a world where Nvidia pushes back the 6090 because they thought, DRAM price really expensive, let's push it back. And then AMD has a 6-month window of having the fastest but very expensive GPU on the market. So yeah, I just don't see that happening. And we've seen sort of similar thinking with a lot of these console releases, like people going, well, 2027 we're expecting a new console generation. Why are they doing that? Why don't they just push it back? Well, these companies, they have allocation at TSMC for certain amounts of wafers that are booked in well in advance. So they have to come up with plans of when they're going to be using this. They lock in DRAM contracts well in advance as well. And so with all of those things playing out, there's often in a position where they actually can't do too many delays unless they can, convert something into another product, or it's something like a super refresh where it's kind of an existing product that's respinned into something else. So yeah, I mean, maybe we'll see a 6-month difference or something like that. They may stockpile some products, but I don't think we'll see like a drastic difference where they go, hey, it's crazy now, let's just push things back. And we saw another question coming up here. There are some rumors about RTX 5000 Supers being prepared for production again. Is there any new info about them? So we did see towards the end of the show that rumor from, I think it was Mega Size GPU on X or Twitter or whatever, suggesting that the Super Series isn't cancelled, which I think we sort of would have had the position that it was cancelled, right?
Yep.
At this point.
Yep.
So that was interesting to sort of see that rumor, but I don't think that was based on anything that was sort of like teased at Computex or anything. That was more just completely out of the blue. We certainly hadn't seen or heard anything relating to the Super Series products here at the show. Is that coming? I'm not 100% sure. I mean, that particular leaker seems to have a reasonable track record, and they've certainly planned the products.
Yep.
So they're not like having to go, oh, what are we doing for our 5070 Super? We do know it's the original plan was largely the same GPU die, but with additional VRAM. Are they still going to do that? Who knows? But yeah, it's an interesting one, because if you're talking about 2027 for new GPU generations, are they going to be able to squeeze the Super Series? It would have made a lot more sense releasing it at the start of this year, which I think was the original plan.
Yeah, I would have thought so, but I don't know what's changed between now and then. And
yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Because the original reason for the delay or cancellation was the main feature was additional VRAM. VRAM became expensive.
Yep.
But it's not like VRAM's not expensive now.
Yeah, it's a bit confusing. I'm not
sure.
So, and to me, it seems like people aren't buying the very heavily overpriced GeForce GPUs based on what we've been hearing and based on what you can see publicly, like looking at Amazon top GPU sale lists. Parts like the 5070 Ti have been selling very slowly. So making that part more expensive,
doesn't seem like a winning combination, does
it?
Yeah,
not sure on that one.
Yeah.
All right, and we'll transition into yet another memory-related question. This one says, what is the current progress of memory being manufactured outside of the current monopoly? So someone other than SK Hynix, Samsung, and Micron. So earlier, actually, I think it was probably late last year, I looked at CXMT, so a memory module with CXMT memory on it, and found that it performed really well, DDR5 memory. And they were reported to be ramping up their production. So at the time when I looked at that memory, their previous production estimates were about 4% market share. That's now doubled to 8%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that is pretty big inroads in a very short period of time. And to sort of put that into context, the company's moved from a capacity of about 100,000 wafers per monthly. That was sort of early 2024 estimates. They're now projected to be doing 300,000 wafers per month, or at least that's the target they'll reach by the end of this year. So pretty big ramp up there. And then as for like stuff like profit, they had at the end of 2024, they had a net loss of $1.6 billion US, but they've managed to claw that back. But in 2025, they actually posted their first profit. So that's good. And by Q1 2026, they had reported a profit, well, an increase of 719% compared to last year. So that's just due to the extra capacity that they've ramped up and obviously the pricing going through the ceiling. So they've brought in $7.5 billion US just in a single quarter, and they're expected to top 10 billion for the year. So they're doing pretty well. Another major player, I guess, they're at least the fourth largest player now. As I said, they've ramped up to 8% of the market share. Where they'll go from here, I'm not sure, but they're going to keep eating away at that pie, I'd say. So it's going to create some problems for the big three when this starts to cool off and there's a fourth major player that happens to be a Chinese player that may play by different rules. So
yeah, I mean, the political implications are interesting as well, because we have heard from companies here when we've asked about Chinese memory that it's not as simple as just, hey, let's go to the market and buy some Chinese memory. If you're a US company that manufactures DDR5 memory sticks, it may also not be feasible from a political side of things if the US, for example, is favoring certain countries or whatever in terms of deals. So which is a little unfortunate, because the technology seems to be, as you sort of tested, reasonable.
Well, my understanding is the US has lifted sanctions on CXMT memory, which is why we're seeing it appear in like Corsair modules and stuff now.
Right, okay, yeah.
So they are making some inroads there. I mean, that can be, I suppose, revoked at any time. As you said, it's very political and not really stuff we cover, but you will start to see CXMT memory modules or memory ICs appearing on modules from makers in the US like Corsair. Don't know what percentage of their modules have CXMT memory, but we have seen evidence that it's making their way into their products. All right, Tim, they want your take on the whole AMD FSR 4.1. We can't decide if we support our APUs or not. So communication fiasco, what's going on there, Tim?
Yeah, I'm not sure. This is quite a bizarre story that sort of emerged throughout Computex. I think one of the hardware, I guess, outlets or whatever from Europe had an interview with AMD during the show asking about FSR 4.1 on RDNA 3.5. So a lot of the APUs these days, they're not using RDNA 4, they're sort of this intermediary RDNA 3.5 architecture. And a lot of the announcements that AMD's had for FSR 4.1 so far have been specific to, RX 7000 series, not RDNA 3 as a whole, but like the specific GPU series. And so obviously that brings up the question, is this feature going to be supported on RDNA 3 and 3.5 and the APU thing? So it's a very reasonable question to ask. And I believe the original, I guess, question and answer session that was had, I think it was with Hardware Lux. So
I think so.
Don't quote me on that. They were sort of suggesting that, I think it was David McAfee said that, they sort of had attempted to do this or whatever, but they're leaning towards not doing it. And then it came out, I think on Twitter or something like that, Frank Azor said, actually, it's not a firm no. And then I think there were some other executives, sharing their opinions and suggesting that actually, that no that was originally given might be more, more wishy-washy or maybe a yes.
A couple of clarifications coming in there.
Yes, a couple of clarifications. I think that was probably because the feedback to the no answer was very negative because a lot of people who have bought APUs with RDNA 3.5, and I think the real key use case for it are the handheld devices that are using the latest APU products. Obviously they're gaming focused. They want to use FSR 4.1 instead of FSR 3.1. Fair enough, it looks a lot better. So to get a no answer, not a great answer, makes people very upset. And so they kind of have tried to walk it back a bit and sort of go, oh, maybe we should do it after all. It seems very messy, very unfortunate, because if you get an on-the-record answer from a company and you sort of suggested that they're directly telling you via a quote that it's not happening and then they go back on it immediately, it kind of,
it's
not
a funny
great
situation.
feeling.
You can see why, because historically talking with the companies for us has been a bit of a waste of time because they don't give you a yes or no or any kind of answer. It's like typically the messaging would be, we're not ready to talk about those products just yet. Like we get some sort of response like that, like, we've announced this today, we're not ready to announce anything further, but, stay tuned type deal, which is a complete non-answer, and that's what they would normally give, and that would annoy us. So they actually do give an answer, it's just not the right answer. So, it's a bit of a weird one.
I mean, if they're not I guess if they're not going to produce FSR 4.1 for RDNA 3.5 and the answer is always going to be no, then eventually you have to say the answer is no because it's going to keep coming up. But it seems weird to have someone sort of suggest that it's no, but with like this caveat that they're still sort of investigating it and they're leaning towards no, but then maybe it's a yes?
The answer is no, we don't want to and we don't plan to, and we're hoping that everyone accepts that this doesn't become a big issue and people just move on with their lives.
Yeah, that's right.
And then they make this miscalculation by making that assumption. Then when the obvious happens and people are like, hang on a minute, why are you not supporting this product? And make a big drama about it. And they're like, oh, people are upset. No, there was a misunderstanding. We will now support it. So it's AMD do this all the time.
It's like they were surprised that there were people that had bought their own product. Like, oh wait, there are people out there using RDNA 3.5
You do
APUs?
want support for that product?
Yeah.
That's unexpected.
We're still selling, our APU, you mean our current generation APUs?
We never saw that coming.
Because of course, RDNA 4 is not used in APUs yet.
Yep.
So RDNA 3.5 is the latest generation currently being sold. Oh, should we support those maybe?
People won't mind.
No, people won't mind if we don't do that, which is just, so it's just another classic sort of AMD. It seems like not everyone's on the same page. You ask someone, they have one answer, you ask someone else, they've got another answer. And Hardware Lux seems like they were just caught in the middle of this, kind of like what we were with the Asus 5070 Ti, where Asus directly says we're discontinuing these products. Then, Nvidia says, actually, we're still making them. And then Asus is like, oh.
At least there was another party involved there that wasn't happy with the messaging.
True.
This is like an internal AMD cluster, which is usually how those ones go.
So seems like just classic Radeon stuff, right? I mean, it took them a long time to release FSR 4.1 for older architectures anyway. That took way too long. And now they're not supporting the APU products, very disappointing. So hopefully they just get their stuff together. They release this feature for people to use. And even if it isn't like, if it doesn't work optimally, like the performance uplift is not amazing or there's some sacrifices, at least give people the option to use it, kind of like DLSS 4.5 on an RTX 20 series GPU. It's not the optimal way to use it. There's a huge performance hit. It's not the best that you would see on an RTX 50 series GPU, but you have the option. You can turn it off if you don't like what it does. So that's at least how I would hope that, this whole situation plays out in the end. But it seems like we're still a little bit away from that occurring. So yeah, we'll just have to see how that goes. And that does it for our Q&A series here at Computex 2026. Just the 2 parts this time. Just wanted to keep it simple so we can go relax, have some lunch and just chill out before our flight later today. So yeah, if you missed part 1, that's on the channel right now. You can go back and check that one out. That part has more of the Computex related questions. So if you want to know what the vibe was like at the show, the AI products and all those sorts of things, and our favorite things that we saw, part 1's got all that stuff. But yeah, that does it for part 2. If you want to support Hardware Unboxed, we've got links to Patreon in the description below. If you sign up, you get access to things like our Discord community, monthly live streams, BTS content, and that sort of dedicated Q&A channel where we sort of prioritize questions from. So yeah, that does it. I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Steve.
We'll see you in the next one.